Okay, so I did want to start out by mentioning the technology adoption curve
Sure.
because I think it sets a good foundation as to why organizational buy-in is even a thing.
Hmm.
Because every organization will have a mix of innovators, laggards, early majority, etc., right? And those personalities impact taking on new technologies. That's the point of the technology curve. So there's always need to get buy-in from somewhere. So with that in our minds, let's dive into what buy-in actually is. And maybe it's easier to say what it's actually not, which it's not someone saying yes to something.
Right. I absolutely agree.
Okay, so you said you agree. Do you see different scenarios play out based on what they're actually saying yes to?
Yeah, you do. I mean, it's the personality, and then it's their other influences. And a lot of times there's a big circle of influence, not even just directly from people within the company, especially C-level leadership. They're in different boards or different organizations, and they're going to get a lot of different feedback. Sometimes it's noise from that group
Yeah.
on what they should do or shouldn't do. That's a challenging distraction for organizations trying to get things done because there's a lot of different ways that they're getting that information and noise.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, and we'll go back to that in a little bit because I want to dive deeper into that. But when you're having this conversation with clients and someone says, yes, I'm on board, let's move forward with this solution, are there any clear signs or phrases maybe where they say yes and you know that maybe we should back up a little bit and make sure that your organization is actually in line with what this means?
Yeah, I think part of that is who you're talking to, right? At different times, you're talking to different levels in the organization. To get as much full buy-in as possible is important. So if you're talking to somebody that is more of a tactical mid-level person in the organization and they're quick to say, yes, let's do this, I think you have to explore what the buy-in is from the leadership, right? What does leadership think? And then how are you going to bring this in and fully get the full organization to adopt it?
Yeah, because when I was doing research on this topic, it was an economic yes, meaning they have the budget for it and they want to move forward because it makes sense with their budget plans. There's a leadership yes, meaning leadership's just in line and they're ready to move forward. And then there's the actual operational yes, meaning the people, the end users are going to make the necessary changes in order to implement the technology effectively, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to get to is that operational buy-in. Essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just this makes a lot of sense, but how is it going to work for our specific company? How do we make sure that people are on board with what they need to do to use it in their daily jobs, right?
Yeah.
We run into that all the time with ERP. ERP is a big one, right? ERP is complex software, and it's not a plug and play solution, right?
Right.
It's not, hey, here I have the ERP, I bought it, I set it up, and it's going to work. It takes a lot of motion for people to understand the value and their role to commit to learn the ERP. So with a lot of our solutions, there's got to be a level of commitment and what we're doing to adopt it.
And you mentioned that who you're convincing matters, and there's different priorities that go into their decision on saying, yes, I'm in. Can you give some examples on who are must-win roles for specific technologies? Like you mentioned ERP, so who has to be on board fully for that to be successful?
It goes right to the top with ERP. You need we talk about in ERP that you have to have an executive sponsor, right? Because what happens every time in an ERP implementation is it's very time consuming. It's ups and downs, and at multiple times during an implementation, the process is going to slow down or come to a halt. And so you need that C-level person having full adoption right from the beginning of the purchase into what that means with the adoption plan, and that C-level person is really the only person that's going to have that full control over there. So if you don't have that C-level buy-in, not just to buy it, but on the adoption plan, it's going to be trouble for both the person selling the technology and the person trying to adopt it.
Okay. And then what do you think about the role that the people actually working in and out of the ERP play into that?
as far as the decision or the adoption or both?
The adoption, like if it's a whole new ERP system and let's say a company does do the implementation, but then the end user isn't on board with learning a new system or whatever, and it causes conflict down the line.
It happens quite frequently. It is challenging. That's where you can try to, during your process evaluation and showing the value of what this is going to do for their job, right? I mean, I think that's a big on the whole process of trying to get buy-in for buying a technology is to get it through multiple levels, and that those frontline users and the people that are using the technology the most, they have to see the value in it, right? Because everybody gets comfortable with how they do things, and then you ask to change. You better see what I call the WIFM, what's in it for me, right?
Right. So just so I understand, does that conversation happen during the decision process or strictly after?
Absolutely does. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Have you seen any trends in terms of the most common like stakeholder mismatch that causes problems down the line? Like we just said, end user and executive leadership is obviously an example. But is there anything else where you see one group of people that say, yes, I'm all in, and then you find out down the line that this group of people wasn't, and it got that conflict?
Yeah, that's a really good. I mean, it kind of depends on the technology, but I think that typically I see the strategic leadership, if you can show how it's going to solve business problems, they tend to move quickly and decisively. Probably the more people that are in the weeds and have their way of doing things are the ones that are more reluctant, right? So any frontline users, people on typically a shop floor type user of technology. If you're talking about a manufacturing environment, those people are really set in their ways and they don't like change. So that can be a big challenge if you're saying, hey, now we're going to implement this type of technology that's going to integrate into how you do things on the shop floor.
Yeah.
I've seen that those people are some of the hardest to change. Okay. And I actually do think, like I said, I think the strategic leadership can be the easiest because if you show them the clear, logical way it's going to help solve business challenges they're having, you're typically more quick, decisive in making decisions and going to embrace new technology.
Okay. When you have technology resistance, there's typically 3 different pillars that it can fall under. One, it's fear, which we talk about that a lot. You lose control or you just have all this uncertainty with AI and data, BI, those specifically. Then there's fatigue, where some people feel like they're overwhelmed with new initiatives across the organization. And then there's friction in just their everyday life because it's change, right? So if clients bring up those problems to you, what guidance do you give on how to overcome that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to making sure it's a clear impact for how it's going to change their world, right? Showing them. So very basic example that most people have had to go through, changing from the classic Outlook to the modern Outlook, right? It's a change, but there are benefits to being in that new environment that are one, it's more conducive to what the modern technology is in Microsoft. It helps you with things connecting into Teams, right? So you show them a couple examples of how that is, and it helps bridge that gap to where they're going, right? And also maybe sometimes painting what the downside is of staying in a older technology world, right? Or doing it the way they're doing it, what that pitfalls and challenges that are going to arise from that.
I do think it's human nature to react more to the negatives than it is the positives.
No question.
So
there's no question.
Makes sense.
Yep.
So do you ever see objections that come up that when sharing, you get the impression that they think it's a technology issue, but in fact, it's more of a trust issue with like the processes and people? And what comes to mind right away is like governance, for example. Like, what do those conversations look like?
Yeah, that's a great call out because I think we're seeing a lot of that right now with AI. AI is it's all over the place. With most of the discussions I've seen with AI and talking to people about embracing an AI roadmap, there's very little visibility and almost no governance, right? So it's a high level battle of what you need to do to build your AI solution roadmap.
Yep.
And with that governance, right? everybody's using AI, and most organizations don't see how their users are actually doing it. They don't have any rules, regulations, governance around it. I think you have to link those things in with a lot of technology solutions, AI definitely being one of those, right? The capabilities of it and then building that governance has to be kind of a two-step and 1A and 1B process.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So with everything that we touched on so far, is there any tricks you use for the discovery process to figure out if any of these are going to be problems? Like, are there secret questions that you always have on your list?
I think one of the big things that I like to do and our team likes to do early in the process is talk about aligning the process along the way and getting those multiple levels into the discussion, right? Because if you don't have that process right along, you can be working with a strong set of influencers that may have the ability to get things done. You know, usually within an organization, if somebody's looking at something, they've been tasked, right? Go look at this, right? And in many situations, they have a lot of power to get it done. But what we want to make sure we're doing is bringing in those different pieces of the decision making, right? Like how does how does that play in with the frontline users, with operations, and with the leadership, right? We have to account for all of those, right? And so to discuss that early on is that we want this to be a successful project and solution for you. And so we want to think about those things and make sure we're checking them off up front. And we've got a roadmap to get there before we would all agree on this, right? So I think that's a big thing is early on in that process, let your clients know that there's multiple steps here we're going to go through to make sure everybody's bought in.
Yeah. And I've seen that document that you guys use. And this kind of correlates with BANT, the whole purpose behind that. So
100%.
Yep. Okay, so you talked about the importance of having an actual business problem that needs to be solved. Has there been instances where you hear about a problem, but it's kind of generic, where you know that it's not going to return the solution that they need because the problem isn't defined enough?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's partly we prescribe here in our world to the challenger sale, right? And part of that is being able to help your clients identify what the path they need to go in. Sometimes, to your point, sometimes people think, here's my problem, and there's a lot more to that we can help them outline. So sometimes it's making them feel good about what that problem is, and then bringing in other elements that are going to help put validity to that solution and really help them. So it's to your point, 100%. That's something that you need to take into account for an incomplete problem or something that isn't as big of the picture. But you don't want to just pass right by it. You want to make sure you're saying, hey, that's a valid concern, but let's talk about the bigger picture on how we can help you.
Right. It's one thing to be bought in when it's easy, right? But then during the implementation process, sometimes a lot of obstacles come up and things get more stressful, and that buy-in has to remain through that. Is there anything you've learned through conversations or through your career that help clients get through that?
Yeah. What I struggle with, candidly, is a lot of times organizations rely on ROI, right? I mean, organizations that are pinning too much on ROI, because from my standpoint, how you measure ROI can be, you can come up with any metric, any formula that you want to make it work or make it not work, right? So I always like to really outline where are your biggest inefficiencies, challenges of really moving the organization forward, and things that are slowing you down, and focus on that, right? So if you focus on solving those issues and correcting those issues and making things more effective and really highlighting those things, and sometimes, to the earlier point, you got to help them with that, right? Because sometimes people are like, they're either myopically focused on one little thing, or they're just like, no, we're good, right? We want to bring in AI because it's cool and it's got all the bells and whistles, and I don't know, it'll be a magic wand that'll help us. No, that's not true, right? You've got to use it in the areas. So you got to really help outline and understanding where those things are, and double down on those, rather than just let them rely on ROI. Because ROI, like I said, can be a very much a skewed metric depending on how you put it together.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And do you think ownership plays a big role into this? Because you mentioned the executive sponsorship, so I'm sure that carries through the whole process.
Huge. Yeah. Earlier in my career when cloud was, nobody wanted to go to cloud, and the people that were really early on most impactful in going to cloud were CFOs, right? Because it was a predictable cost model, right? So you had to think about having those champions. And I think for just technology in general, like we said earlier, the C leadership is going to be able to really relate things to deficiencies in their business. Mm-hmm. So if you get them on board early and often, they're going to drive that and help get that to the finish line.
Okay, that makes sense. So staying on this topic of maintaining momentum, do we have any type of like pilot structure when it comes to, I'm sure for ERP implementations for sure, but across our technology stack that helps like reinforce that confidence that they had in the beginning? That small quick win, we always lean into that phrase.
Yeah, so when you say pilot, you mean like
just anything that like right off the bat they see progress and they gain more confidence that the rest of the project will work out.
Yeah, I think it's part of what we do here at 2W that I think is effective is project management, right? So having the visibility to the progress and mapping through that on a effective project plan and mapping through that is huge. And I think the project managers really play a huge role of success for that in 2W to continue that adoption curve, right? Hey, here we are, right? Prior to a sale being executed, I think you have to make sure that you're outlining what that path looks like and what success looks like, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's a challenge when people want to do something. I want to do AI. We have to start small, right? Like, let's build this path forward so we understand what success is. Because if you don't have that, you got to take a step back and say, okay, what is success going to look like?
Yeah.
Is it measurable? Is it criteria that we can agree on to get them moving forward?
Okay. Yeah, well, you said in the beginning about transparency with the project management team. I think that's huge. Okay, so moving on to change management and the importance of enablement during this whole process, which we kind of touched on, but just to give it its own spotlight. Like, obviously, you mentioned training, and I'm sure we provide documentation to help along the way. But is there anything else from maybe a strategy level that is big?
Yeah, it's hard, like, because we said there's different roles, there's different people look at it differently. But I think you've got to we try to use a lot of analogies, right? Like getting people to think about how things happen in their personal lives, right? Simple example, right? If people are looking at, I'm going to Epicor cloud licensing today. I have on-premise, right? And they're like, I don't want to do that, and it's change, right? So one thing that we talk about is always being on the latest and greatest version of technology. There's a value to that, and not having to do any motion to upgrade is big, right?
Yeah.
And the analogy we use a lot is your iPhone, right? Anybody that's on an Apple iPhone, several years ago, you used to have to manually activate those upgrades to happen, right? And me, embarrassed to say, I oftentimes got way behind on those. And then all of a sudden I had apps that weren't working and challenges, right? Well, now Apple got smart and said, when those upgrades happen, we're going to push them to you, right? You'll be upgraded tonight to the latest iOS.
Yeah.
I like that, right? It's no work on me. It's going to happen. I don't have the issue of an app not working or whatever. So there's value to that. And sometimes explaining a real life analogy to somebody, they're like, you're right. I do like that, you know?
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up the iPhone example, because I always used to get like too click happy, and I would click update like in the middle of the day. And then those updates sometimes took like an hour.
They did,
on your phones. So.
That's very true. I remember that.
Yeah. Again, staying on this topic of momentum. So when you are in the handoff process, handing it off to either the PM or one of our infrastructure consultants, whatever it may be, what happens in that process to make sure that everything that you promised in the beginning is going to get executed through?
Yeah, that's a great great call out, because I think that's a big part of the adoption success, right? So we do an internal handoff, and I think it's really important for organizations to embrace this process, right? Like it's, I've seen it in my past careers where, sales sells something and it gets hands off to project management and service delivery, and it there's just a huge disconnect. So to take the time to say, hey, here's the solution. Here's the people that are involved. Here's the players. Here's the execution plan. Here's what we discussed. Very important, right? That helps build the effective project plan, not only just the hands-on work of the consultants, but how the project manager should play into that, right? Because there are different personalities, right? Personalities aren't going to show on a scope of work, right? It's got to be a discussion to say, hey, here's the people that are challenged by this, right? That we're a little slow to get them over that ability to say, hey, let's do it, right? Here's the people that are on board. Here's the, right? And understand those dynamics, because it makes a huge difference, right? To be able to speak to that and help massage and bring that through.
Awesome. Okay. One question that's probably not as common, but just curious, have you ran into a circumstance where there was turnover in the role that you were primarily working with? How'd you navigate that and making sure that everything's still...
Yeah, that's a great call out, because that does happen, right? And I think that's why it's important to sell across different segments of the organization and not just be single-threaded. If you're single-threaded trying to sell something to one person, that person could win the lottery, they could get a new job, right? Whatever, right? So being able to have that insight and have a plan early on. Remember we talked about, right? Like, here's where we're going with this. We're going to talk to the C-level. We're going to talk to different people in operations, right? Alignment on your process and alignment on what's going on is critical, because you don't know, right? People have life-changing experiences where they might not be there anymore.
Right. Okay. And so we talked about AI and ERP implementation a lot through these examples. Is there anything different that stands out through like a managed services example?
Yeah, I mean, managed IT, managed services provider solutions, very similar, right? And people get used to it, and there's different dynamics there too, because you could be talking about, and I think the trickier one is a dynamic where they're doing their own in-house IT, moving to 2W potentially as a third party. That's tricky, because you're used to, I'm going to walk down the hall and have Fred, our sysadmin, solve my issue, right? So it's a different dynamic to get them used to a different culture. So you got to really talk about that, because I think that's the hardest thing about people changing their IT support. It's for that end users, right? Because again, you're asking people to change, right? So I'm changing my behavior, whether it's I'm working with in-house IT and I'm used to, I know them, I see them, they're part of the company, or I was just used to the people that we worked with before. But you've got to be able to really highlight and walk through how these changes are going to impact them, right? And it's going to be good. And experiences like at 2W, we've got 24/7 support. You can do click the chat, which I love, right? I mean, in my personal life, if I can use click to chat, I do. It just get things done faster, easier, right? You send an email, did somebody respond? Your phone call, right? It's got to be relayed usually onto somebody, right? Click the chat, instantly chatting with an IT consultant. It's great. So, but the bottom line is you got to be very cognizant and aware and sensitive to it's going to be a change for them, and show them where this experience really works.
Right. If a leader listening to this goes back to work tomorrow, what's the first question they should ask themselves about a current or upcoming technology initiative?
Build a plan. Work to get full buy-in from different key segments of your organization to make sure that they have value, over communicate that it's coming, right? I mean, if you're looking at a potential change, get people on board, right? And show them, hey, this is good, right? And sell them the value of it.
Awesome. Well said. Well, thank you for flying in from North Carolina to do this with me.
Yeah.
I know this is the only reason you came.
That's right. It was for this.
Awesome.
Thanks, Danielle.